Good afternoon, good people. It's time for our Horns Report Weekly. Happy to be hosting this week, and no Billy Gates in the house today. So I'm sports reporter Noah Gross, and we have one of my special guests, one of my friends, to talk some Texas football today ahead of the Cotton Bowl. It's Horns 24/7 insider Eric Henry, dressed in his Monday best ready to roll. Eric, first question to you, my friend. Texas heading into the semifinal, two options of where they could have gone as far as Arlington for the Cotton Bowl or Miami for the Orange Bowl as well. As the resident mayor of every city in Florida, are you happy that this is in Arlington so you can actually get some work done and you don't have 400 people to hang out with in South Beach?
First off, Noah, appreciate you having me on as always. I know we're battling a couple tech issues here, so hopefully it's all smooth on your end. To your question, listen, as the resident, ambassador of tourism for the great state of Florida, of course, there is part of me being a Tampa native that wishes I were back home, had an opportunity to catch up with some friends. But on the flip side, as you mentioned, it's just a 2.5 hour drive up to Arlington, up to DFW. And in that sense, I will at least get some work done as opposed to trying to, catch up and play the Haps and catch up with a bunch of friends and whatnot. So it's a double-edged sword, but hey, I will take this option and I will get back home in the summer.
Yeah, most people on the beat seem to be happy that they're still able to cover a game and see different places. Not be in Atlanta, because we've seen a lot of Atlanta, and as everyone knows, we're going back to cover Texas if they win against Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl for the national championship game. Obviously, a lot to talk about in this game. This seems like the much more marquee matchup in the semifinals. Obviously, I think we're biased having covered Texas for the entire season, but Texas and Ohio State, two of the biggest brands in the sport relative to Penn State and Notre Dame as well for a spot in the national championship game. I want to start with the idea that Texas is, as Steve Sarkisian says, a massive underdog. Yes, I think it's a 6.5 point spread where Ohio State is favored, and the Buckeyes are playing some very good football. But this idea that Texas is a massive underdog when this is the first game they've been the underdog this season, are you kind of buying into that, or is that just Sark trying to get an extra chip on his shoulder for the Texas Longhorns?
Yeah, no, I caught the back end of your question referring to, Texas being a massive underdog. Again, sorry about the tech issues. I'm not sure if that's on mine or yours, but in relation to, buying into Texas being an underdog, I mean, listen, you take a look at this Ohio State team, and I don't think, if we take a 10,000-foot view, you can say this was a down year for the SEC, right? I know that sounds weird to say, considering the sentiment, right, entering the year was, man, Texas, they didn't get Alabama, they didn't get LSU, they didn't get, Ole Miss, didn't get Tennessee, right? But all in all, I think the college football playoff has shown it's been a bit of a down year in relation to the Big Ten. You'd probably take your chances and say that that was a stronger league this year, right? And I think everything that Ohio State had to go to, and listen, a very impressive win over Oregon, the way that they, shut down a Heisman candidate, a Heisman finalist in Dylan Gabriel, and the potency of that offense compared to Texas, which, and here's the beauty of this field, if I may steal a Steve Sarkisianism, right? The beauty of this thing is that genuinely, I think the Oregon game showed that if any team in this field remaining brings their A game, they can beat anybody. And I think that's the thing that should give you confidence if you're a Texas fan. Now, the flip side of that is, we saw Texas really fail to put together 60 minutes and 60 minutes plus of consistent football. And that's what opened the door for Arizona State to get back in it. So, yeah, I think Texas being a 6-point underdog is fair, but there's plenty of reason for optimism just based on what I said. There isn't a team left in this field. If they don't play their A game, they're more than capable of winning a title. It's just, can you do it for 60 minutes?
Answered the question beautifully despite not being able to hear most of it. So thank you, my friend. You mentioned Texas not being able to play a full 60 plus minutes as Arizona State was able to come back in the Peach Bowl. Just wanted to be able to gauge your level of concern for this Texas team as to what happened really in the second half against Arizona State. Is that a big level of concern, or is this just in the postseason, things like that can kind of happen?
Okay, so the answer is twofold. One, there is a level of concern because Noah, I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago. Third quarters for this team over the past 6, 7 games have not been kind. I asked Steve Sarkisian about it a couple of weeks ago, and he said, and I'm not chastising Steve for this answer. He's trying to recall off the top of his head, but he said he would like to think that his team had, sizable leads coming out of halftime, and maybe that played a factor in some of the offensive inefficiency in the third quarter. But that's just not the case. You look no further than the Georgia game. The last 2 times Texas played at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the third quarter was what opened the door for Georgia to get back in the game. Who would have thunk it, right? That you knock Carson Beck out of the game, you have to go to a backup in Gunnar Stockton, and Gunnar Stockton is the one who helps Georgia. In terms of plays, Texas only ran, if memory serves me correct, something like 6 or 8 plays compared to Georgia's 25. The same happened against Arizona State, right? So when you say level of concern, there is a pattern there. Now, the flip side of it is, I'll say this. Texas's offense, and it's just the way the game played out, right? I do believe, Steve Sarkisian, that it's just kind of happenstance. Texas's defense was on the field for 30-something minutes entering the fourth quarter. I don't care how great this defense is, and we're talking about a defense that's arguably the top, unit in the nation. If you're on the field for 30-something minutes compared to Arizona State's 11 and change, A, that is going to tire out your defense, and B, that's going to allow for an Arizona State defense to be rested and make some plays against a Texas offense that, as I laid out, has had some struggles in the second half. So it's a concern in that there's been a bit of a pattern, but again, to use Steve Sarkisian's phrase, the beauty of this thing is it's something you can remedy, right? Steve Sarkisian, as the play caller, you have some success on first down, you're able to chew up a little bit of clock. At least that helps your defense out. And best case scenario, if you're taking a lead or at least a close ball game from the halftime, intermission into the third and fourth quarter, at least your defense is going to be there to make plays if you help them out a little bit. So it's a concern, but something that is fixable.
Regardless of how it went down, Texas happy to be in the Final Four. Just if you're joining us right now, talking with Horns 24 insider reporter Eric Henry, who's been covering this team all season long. Obviously, give him a follow on all platforms, giving very good coverage throughout this Texas season, and he'll be heading up to Arlington as well as we will throughout the week. You mentioned Arizona State being able to get back in the game. They did that largely with Cam Scadaboo kind of leading the charge. This Ohio State team, you can go in a number of different directions with the amount of weapons they have. Very talented guys. Jeremiah Smith, I think the one that's kind of grabbing the most headlines because he's just unbelievable freshman. They have some really good running backs too, and a quarterback that Texas is familiar with. When you look at the skill positions of Ohio State, Eric, what kind of stands out to you the most on that front?
Yeah, no, again, I'm having to play piecemeal with your question, but I got the gist of it. When you talk about the skill position guys for Ohio State, here's the thing in my mind where, again, I don't want to say it's a worry, but let's just call a spade, right? It's definitely the most primary concern for Texas. Noah, this is going to be, in terms of skill position talent, in terms of offensive potency, Texas's biggest test since last year's semifinal against Washington. You look at last year, Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, 2 very capable receivers, obviously both of them in the NFL. Of course, Dylan Johnson in the backfield, and then Michael Penix, of course, having an excellent first season here, with the Atlanta Falcons. He was a stud last year for Washington. You fast forward, you talked about Jeremiah Smith being the most, attention-grabbing weapon for Ohio State. But listen, whether it's Judkins and Henderson in the backfield, they've got 2 rushers we're going to go for who have north of 900 yards this year. Very talented, capable group in the backfield in that regard. And then really it's a three-headed monster in terms of the receiving group. So yes, it is something that, again, I think if you are a Texas fan entering this game, that would be the number one concern. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but the number 2 concern would be Texas's ability to establish the run against an Ohio State run defense that allows less than 100 yards per game. But no doubt about it. No, and it's probably one of the most, in sports, you kind of get these weird, like symmetrical storylines that kind of weave themselves together really naturally. Well, you rewind 1 year ago, and the biggest question around Texas was that secondary. This is their first real chance at redemption on a huge stage, right? They took care of the challenges in SEC play during the regular season, but again, not necessarily the most potent of skill position guys, and potency of offense. Now they're going to have their real test to say, hey, we are able to redeem ourselves from the year prior.
Yeah, and this is an Ohio State team that Everybody always asks, are you playing your best football at the end of the season? And Ohio State certainly is playing their best football here at the end of the season, having just steamrolled Tennessee and then Oregon, who looked like the only really, I don't want to say dominant team, but they were the only real unbeaten team up to that point. Ohio State just dominated them. All right, we talked about that Texas defense, which has been the strength of their team, led by Thorpe Award winner Jahdae Barron, guys like Anthony Hill as well, and guys that have impressed me a ton, Alfred Collins and company up front. But as far as that Texas offense, they had to throw the ball, and they had to throw the ball a lot when things got a bit iffy last week against Arizona State. Running the ball was a struggle for Texas, and that's been such a key for Texas. They were so good against Clemson on the ground. Eric, how important is that for Texas, and what do you kind of see on the front of Texas trying to get the ground game going against this Buckeyes defense?
No, it's huge for Texas to be able to get the ground game going. Look, through 15 weeks, right? This is not a run game that's going to be any different than they were throughout the year, right? We know it's been an inconsistent team as far as running the football. Yes, the rushing yards in the early part of the year, as far as total yards were there, but no, let's call a spade again. It wasn't up until, Jaden Blue's breakout run against Clemson, in which the three longest runs from scrimmage for this team came from non-running backs. You had the 67-yarder from Arch Manning against Louisiana Monroe. You had the Ryan Wingo play against Michigan. And then, of course, you had Isaiah Bond as well, right? So the run game isn't going to all of a sudden, in my mind, this is no disrespect to Quintravian Wisner and Jaden Blue, Kyle Flood's group up front, but they're not going to magically turn into a team that's going to just break out for 300 yards, right? However, where it does matter is Texas staying ahead of the chains, which has been crucial this year. Staying ahead of the chains, keeping yourself in manageable down and distance situations. In the early part of the year, Steve Sarkisian talked about it when I would ask him post-game, hey, do you feel that you're getting enough out of the run game as far as the consistency? And he would say, hey, all that matters is if I look up at the stat sheet and I've got 300 passing yards and 200 rushing yards, it was a good day. But there was no doubt that they were relying too much on the chunk play and relying heavily, Noah, on, the short and intermediate passing game, the screen game, which is such a heavy part of Steve Sarkisian's offense, in early downs to keep themselves ahead of the chains. Then eventually the running game caught up once Quintravian Wisner kind of emerged as the starter post-Oklahoma. We saw the stretch he had against Arkansas, against Texas A&M to close the year. But I do think for Texas against Ohio State, it's going to be too much to ask. Listen, Quinn Ewers can't convert a 4th and 13, 4th and 14 every game, right? That's just not a recipe that's conducive for success. So whether it's Jaden Blue, whether it's Quintravian Wisner, if they can at least run it effectively when they need to, those early downs, third and shorts, those things matter. This is, again, an Ohio State defense that's holding teams to under 100 yards per game. You're not going to magically break out and hit for 225. But if you can do it when it matters, when the moments matter, Noah, it'll go a long way for this Texas offense to have success.
You mentioned some of those runs specifically with runs like third and short and just getting, positive yards on first down. That's what a lot of the questions were about this Texas offense. Were they able to get a guy that could run between the tackles, which Quintravian Wisner has been that guy a lot. They've also gone to freshman Jarrett Gibson a couple big times, I think against Clemson in that opening drive as well. He's had some fumble issues. So that's going to be one of the many big keys for this Longhorns team as they take on Ohio State Friday. All right, that is Eric Henry, Horns 24 Insider. We will see you in Arlington this week. I hope you join us at the Media Hospitality Room this time, and looking forward to seeing you in Arlington, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
Anytime, buddy. Appreciate it.
All right, that's Eric Henry of Horns 24/7, providing a bunch of content a week. He's been great throughout the season, really insightful. You can read his stuff really on any social platform, and then Horns 24/7 as well. As far as us, ton of content this week on KXAN.com and all of our shows as well. We'll have we're talking today about why this game means so much for Texas players playing at home in the Cotton Bowl in a stadium where so many of these Texas players have had great memories. Think about Michael Taft and Westlake, Anthony Hill at Denton Ryan, and then last year in the Big 12 championship game as well. I know when Texas was in that old conference. So much to talk about when before the Longhorns and Buckeyes take the field. And then, of course, we'll have Texas Game Day, the official pregame show of Texas football. That's Friday at 5:30 over on KBVO, getting you ready for kickoff. For now, that's it for the Horns Report. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you later this week.